And yes, we are going back to the book of John. Now, we're almost finished. We spent all of 2023 in the book of John. But we have a few lessons left. And when I say a few, I don't know if that's 4, I don't know if that's 6, but somewhere in that neighborhood. We have a few lessons left. And we're in John chapter 18. And what I want you to kind of think about, I know you've heard it, but it's been a while since you've heard it. We're all in the last hours of the life of Jesus. And it was way back in John chapter 14. We were in the last night, the last hours of the life of Jesus. And he had this supper. And he told his apostles, I'm going away. Where I'm going, you cannot come. They had these troubled hearts. And so we had lesson after lesson for more than 2 months from chapter 14, 15, 16, where Jesus is talking to his apostles. In chapter 17, you remember that he, in the midst of them, prayed with them. And then he turns his prayer and prays for all of us who will come later, that we might be one. And now we're beginning chapter 18. And I want to look at this next hour or 2 or 3 in the life of Jesus. The end of the life of Jesus. Primarily through the characters involved in the end of his life. And so to set the stage, I want you to look at chapter 18 and verse 1. Because when he had finished praying for the 11 and praying for all of us who would come later, he left with his disciples, crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden. And he and his disciples went into it. Now, that's all John's going to say about the garden. If we wanted to take time and go to Matthew and Mark and Luke, we would know the name of the garden. We'd know some other details about the garden. But this is all John chooses to tell us. And the first character I want you to consider at the end of the life of Jesus is the most obvious of the ones, Judas. The character of Judas. Now, before we jump to any conclusion about Judas, or maybe the better words are before we become too harsh in our judgment about Judas, let's all remember that Judas had a problem. And so as I say he had a problem, you and I can slow down a little bit and realize that we also have a problem, or we have problems. And everybody knows from, if you remember a lesson way a long time ago in the book of John, the problem of Judas was greed. He wrestled with this problem of greed. And the truth of the matter is, many of us probably wrestle with the problem of greed. And in fact, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus will say, evidently knowing that we would all wrestle with this problem, you're going to have to make up your mind as you go through life. Is it going to be money that is the ruler of your life, or is it going to be God who is the ruler of your life? But as Judas wrestles with the problem, as so often happens with people, he loses in the wrestling match. And so his love for money got the best of him. And he's the one who has gone and made arrangements with the chief priest to sell the identity of Jesus. Now, it's just a couple of hours earlier. It's just a couple of hours, maybe 2 or 3 hours earlier, that they were at the supper and Jesus says to the 12, one of you will betray me. And then he identified it to be Judas. And Judas gets up immediately and leaves. And he went to the chief priest, and he, in exchange for 30 pieces of silver, made the agreement that he would give away the identity of Jesus. So now you look at the next verse, and it begins to make sense. Now Judas, who was to betray him, knew the place. He knew about the garden because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. This was a common place for Jesus to take the 12 for refuge, for rest, for prayer. And Judas knew where Jesus would be going. So now you look at verses 4 and 5. Jesus, knowing that all was going to happen to him, went out and asked, "What is it you want?" Well, you're wondering, how does that verse get in there? Because a mob has come. A mob has come, and they're led by Judas. And they come with lanterns, and they come with torches, and they come with weapons. And they're coming to get Jesus. They've been charged by the chief priest. They've been charged by the Sanhedrin council. And Jesus sees them coming. He knows what this is all about. "Who is it that you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. Now, the interesting thing is, they don't know who he is. There's only a dozen people there, 11 and Jesus. They don't know which one is Jesus. And you would think they would know Jesus. He's been speaking everywhere. He's been doing miracles everywhere. And you would think that he is this bold and handsome and striking figure that everyone recognized. But if you go back to the book of Isaiah, you find there was not one single thing about his appearance that would draw attention to him. When God put body around the spirit of Jesus, he did not make that body so that the body would draw attention. And I have said for years to people, you have the outside and you have the inside. And while all the world pays so much attention about the outside, I'm telling you it's the inside that's most important. And ultimately this lesson is about the inside of us. It's the difference. And people fell in love with the man who didn't look the part, but he talked the part because he talked from the heart. And he had this compassion, and he had this kindness, and he had this truth about him that they'd never seen before. Jesus of Nazareth, that's who we want. I'm Jesus. And Judas the traitor was standing there with them. And when Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. I've always wondered about that particular phrase. What was it about the realization and his strength of character to say, "I'm the one"? What was it that would make them draw back and fall to the ground? And we'll never know altogether the answer to that question. So now, the armed guards are there before Jesus. And Judas is a betrayer. He's a betrayer. And we don't like people who betray other people, do we? And we all remember what happens to Judas. When Judas sees the cross, and when he realizes what happens to Jesus, when he realizes the trial goes the way he didn't plan for it to go, apparently, he is absolutely overwhelmed in his heart that he lost the battle with greed. He is so sorry. And you know what he does? You know what he does. He gives the money back. They don't want to take it back, but he throws it at them. And in his sorrow, he goes out and kills himself. He hangs himself. That's the story of Judas. That's the story of betrayal. And now the second character jumps into the picture. Because the second character is Peter. Now, Peter is someone we love. We don't particularly care for Judas. So we don't name our children or grandchildren Judas. You've not known anyone in Cordell schools ever named Judas, but you've known a lot of Peters. But just an hour or two before, when Jesus had said, one of you is going to betray me, Peter's the one in great boldness who pipes up and says, I will die for you. And I'm telling you, Jesus, don't have to worry about this one. I will die for you. I've learned through life to be careful about my boast. Be careful about my declarations. To say, I will never do that. I'll never be like that. It sometimes comes back to haunt you. And Jesus will turn to Peter that night, as you well remember us talking about, and he says, Peter, before morning comes, you're going to deny me not just once, but 3 times. But before that happens, you're going to love Peter. Watch what happens. The mob is there. They have their weapons. Now watch what Peter does. Then Peter, Simon Peter, who had a sword. Now I don't know if it's a saber. Some people say they carried more like a dagger, a double-edged dagger. I took a group of men to lunch this last week. All of our facilities crew. Took them to a place called Joe's Pizza. Thanking them for all the hard work they've done, especially when it's been 1 degree, 2 degrees, and pipes are breaking, and they're out there all hours. And so we're leaving, and the head of the crew, the head of facilities, is a man named Kerry Falling. Probably about 50 years old. One of the finest men I've ever known. Like Randy Holman. He's just a fine guy. He too has a health problem right now. He too has a cancer that's bulged out from his neck, and they're going to have to go in Dallas and cut out part of his tongue and take all this out. And Kerry said, I have something for you. So we walk out to his pickup. He hands me a handmade pocket knife. It's gold inlaid. Fits inside of a little sheath that's got snakeskin lining in the sheath. And he said, I had this made for you. But he said, I've got something else. And he pulled out this long box. He said, Colt not only made firearms, but years ago they made knives. Now, they don't make them anymore because all the imported knives and there's no market for it. But he said, this is a collector's item. And I pulled it out of the box. And it's in this sheath. You can tell the handle's old. And it's about this long. And it's double-edged. I started to bring it. But I didn't want to scare you. I didn't want to scare Ronnie in particular. That's a joke, okay? But it is probably much like what Peter had. And he drew it. And he struck the high priest's servant. And he cut off his right ear. And John says the servant's name was Malchus. And you know what? We like that kind of stuff, don't we? We like the action movies. And we like the courageous guys. And we like this guy who's a fighter. And we like fighters. And so we all love Peter. I will never, ever, I'll die for you. That's the way it's going to work, Jesus. No, you're not. You'll deny me. But it doesn't look like it yet because we love the fighter. He pulls his sword. He cuts off the right ear. Now, from other accounts, we know what Jesus does. He'll fix that ear. And I've always thought, if I'd been that servant, he put my ear back on, I'd have walked over on Jesus' side and said, I'm going to fight for him. I would have done something like that, I think. But listen to the words of Jesus to Peter. It must rattle Peter to the core of his being. Jesus commanded Peter. Now watch the wording. He commanded Peter. Put your sword away. This is pretty stout. Get rid of that sword. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? Peter, don't you understand? I'm about to save the world. My blood's going to be shed so that everybody's sins can go away. Peter, are you trying to stop the plan of God? Are you planning to stop me saving the world? And so the detachment soldiers with the commander and Jewish officials arrested Jesus. Now, John will say that one of these 11 disciples is known by these people, and they let him follow into the courtyards. And he goes back, and he gets permission to let Peter come into the courtyards. Probably a big mistake. Because as Peter goes to the courtyards, John says, Peter will be accused of being a disciple of Jesus, and he will deny Jesus once, twice, 3 times. And I don't like to do this. You know I don't like to do this, but I'm going to jump over to Matthew for a moment. And I want you to read with me this long passage from Matthew, because I want you to see just exactly what Peter did. Now, Peter was sitting out in the courtyard. The other disciple got him into the courtyard. And a servant girl came to him. You were with Jesus of Galilee, she said. But he denied it before them all. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. And then he went out to the gateway. Another servant girl saw him and said to the people, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. He denied it again with an oath. I don't know the man. And then, after a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away. And guess what he does? He denies it a 3rd time. And he swears, saying, I don't know the man. And after that, notice that last line. Dawn is approaching. The rooster crows. And Peter has now done this. He has denied Jesus. It's denial. Now, I want you to think about that word denial, as Bert puts it on the screen. I want you to contrast that word denial with the word betrayal. And I want to ask you, which is worse? Which is worse? Aren't they kind of similar? I mean, one sold the identity of Jesus because greed took over his heart. The other one has fear take over his heart. And not just once, but 3 times he denies Jesus. What is the difference between denial and betrayal? How do I know the difference between the two? Which is worse? Well, if the story ended there, then I think they'd be the same. But remember what Judas did? Do you remember how sorry Judas was? Do you know that Peter was also sorry? Because it says, if we go back to Matthew, it says that when the cock crowed and Jesus looked at Peter, Peter went out and did what? Wept bitterly. He was so brokenhearted. But Peter will see Jesus being crucified, as Judas saw Jesus being crucified, and Peter will stay with the 11. until something amazing happens. The grave is open and Jesus is resurrected. And Jesus appears to the 11. And what I wish is we had the conversation between Peter and Jesus recorded. I wish we had the encounter recorded. Can you visualize what might have happened the first time they were by themselves? And Peter finally got up the courage to say, Jesus, I am so sorry. I never thought it would happen to me. I didn't mean to deny you. I didn't want to deny you, but I got so afraid. And Jesus, I'm so sorry. And can you imagine Jesus reaching out and grabbing Peter and saying, Peter, it's okay. I forgive you. You're going to be so important in my kingdom. You're going to be so important to the future. Do you see the difference in the two? Look at this last statement. It's the principle. It's the end. It's not the wrong that you do. It's not the wrong that you do. We all do the wrongs. It's what you do about the wrong. It's not the wrong that you do. Everybody comes before Jesus with so many things wrong that they have done. It's not about the wrong. It's what you do about the wrong that you do. And Judas didn't do anything about the wrong that he did. He was sorry. He gave the money back, but he hopelessly went out and hanged himself. And Peter, who did something very similar to Judas, goes back to Jesus. And Jesus opens his arms in forgiveness. Don't you see the beauty of that? Don't you see that no matter what we've done in this world, no matter what we've done in this world, we can come to Jesus and find entrance into the kingdom, baptism into the kingdom, sins being washed away, and be embraced regardless of the past. And if you're in the kingdom and you do this horrible wrong, and I promise you, those of us in the kingdom understand that we've done this horrible wrong. When you come back, the scripture is so plain, when you come back and say, Jesus, I have made such a mistake. It's this forgiveness that's poured all over us. It's an amazing story, the story of Jesus Christ. It's an amazing gift that Jesus had given us. Because I detest the wrong in my life. And I can tell you I detest what's going wrong in this nation. I can tell you I detest what's going wrong in this world. I can tell you that I detest that it's going wrong at a faster rate. But I mostly detest the wrong in my life. But I can smile and know, not smile because I do wrong, but smile and know because Jesus forgives over and over again.